Welcome to the deep dive. Our mission today is pretty straightforward, but it's going to require us to look at things through a very specific, very analytical lens.
Right.
We're taking these narratives, the stories of street hustlers, traffickers, the big kingpins, and we're going to treat their rise, their come up, as pure business case studies.
We are. We're stripping away the myth, all the Hollywood glamour, and even the moral judgment for a moment, just to look at the cold, hard numbers, the spreadsheets of survival and scaling.
The goal here is to try and uncover the universal laws of rapid growth.
It's a fascinating, if brutal, exercise.
It is because whether you're launching a tech startup in Silicon Valley or, establishing the most dominant crack spot in the South Bronx, there seem to be these foundational principles that just apply across the board.
Things like market capture, supply chain, reinvestment.
Exactly. We're looking at these criminal enterprises as well as hyper-accelerated business incubators.
But that's where we hit the big question, isn't it? The one that's going to guide this whole deep dive.
Go on.
Does criminal entrepreneurship really follows the legitimate business playbook? Arbitrage, logistics, ROI. Or does it operate on a fundamentally different kind of logic? A logic that's, accelerated and enforced by lawlessness and, most critically, by violence.
And we are going to run that debate throughout this entire analysis, looking at the operational details from the people who actually lived it. We're talking about revenue figures that go from a $50 sale to eventually billions.
So while we do that, while we talk about ROI and logistics, we have to be absolutely clear about one thing.
I think I know what you're going to say.
Every single dollar, every kilo moved has a cost that isn't on the ledger. We're talking extreme risk, human trauma, paranoia, and decades-long prison sentences. This isn't just a spreadsheet.
No, it's not. That context has to ground everything we discuss. So, with that in mind, let's unpack this blueprint for illicit growth. Okay, so Section 1, launch and early scaling.
The very beginning.
In any market, legitimate or not, scaling starts with one thing. It's about recognizing and just ruthlessly exploiting a profit margin.
And in this world, that margin is almost always driven by one core concept. Geographic arbitrage.
Explain that.
You find a place where the supply is cheap, usually near a source or a big import hub, and you move that product to a place where demand is desperate, supply is scarce, and the price difference is just, well, it's lethal.
The early cocaine trade is the perfect example of this. I'm thinking of guys like Chongo.
Right. So New York City in the 80s, it's a huge import hub. A lot of the wholesale operations are run by Dominican groups. But the real genius, the key to scaling, wasn't just buying in New York.
No. It was realizing what would happen if you moved that product just a few hundred miles away.
Exactly. Chongo's strategy, it's all there in the source accounts. He's paying about $15,000 for a kilo of cocaine in New York.
Which is the hub price.
Right. So if he tries to sell that kilo wholesale in New York, the market's saturated, his margins are thin, he's making maybe a grand, $2,000 profit per kilo if he's lucky.
Not a great ROI for the risk involved.
Not at all. But he realizes, if I drive this same kilo down to Richmond, Virginia, where the supply chains are shaky and people are hungry for it, he could wholesale it for $28,000.
Wow. Okay, so do the math on that.
It's a $13,000 to $14,000 profit gap per kilo. You're nearly doubling your investment. And what's the cost? The cost is the logistics and the risk of moving it.
You're exploiting a market inefficiency, a lack of established protected supply routes. That's pure business.
But the risk of crossing state lines, it's exponential. The financial return just had to justify that exposure.
And it gets even crazier when you break it down to retail, right? In the early crack market, an ounce of powder cocaine might sell for, say, $400 or $500 in a major city.
Yeah, a place like New York.
But if you take that same volume, cook it into crack, and transport it to one of these starved out-of-town markets, the markup could be 30-fold.
It's an insane opportunity. This isn't about winning a gunfight, not at this stage. It's about seeing a gap in the market and having the guts and the logistics to fill it.
And this wasn't new, was it? This principle was the foundation of the marijuana trade decades earlier.
Absolutely. The Reefer King operations in the 1970s, the unit of measure back then was a lid.
A lid being what? Roughly an ounce? Like a sandwich baggie full?
Yeah, 3-finger or 5-finger baggie. And the pricing was all about that geographic disparity. An ounce of pot in Tucson, Arizona, which was a hub because it's so close to the border,
Right.
it cost you $10.
Yeah.
Just $10.
Okay.
You move that exact same baggie across the country to New York City, and the price instantly doubles to $20.
Now, that sounds like small potatoes compared to the cocaine margins we were just talking about.
It is, but it's the same principle. That early recognition of the market gap. Tucson is the source, New York is starved. That was the spark. That $10 profit margin is what eventually scaled into a multi-million-dollar logistics empire.
So recognizing the gap is the spark. But what's the fuel? How do you keep that fire burning and growing?
The next principle, the power of relentless, aggressive reinvestment.
We call this the Freeway Rick Ross principle, and it seems like almost every major figure who successfully scaled up followed it, whether they knew it or not.
You have to. You have to immediately flip every dollar of profit back into the business to maximize volume and speed. It's like compounding interest on steroids. It's deadly efficient.
And that reinvestment cycle, it's not just a good idea, it's an absolute necessity, right? Because the capital you need to go from selling on the street to buying wholesales, it's a huge barrier.
It's an insurmountable barrier for most small-time guys.
Let's get really granular.
Yeah.
Think about the first crack operations. The accounts detail how a young hustler, they'd get $50 from a user.
Yeah.
They wouldn't just hand over the product. They'd go down the block, buy maybe half a gram from their supplier, come back, cook it into crack for the user.
And then charge them again for the service of cooking it.
And again for the pipe, and again for the torch to light it.
That's a highly leveraged, predatory microtransaction. It's genius in a horrible way. That tiny profit, if you immediately flip it into the next buy, it scales your available volume incredibly fast.
It's like a startup hitting cash flow positive on day one. You're maximizing the velocity of capital.
And that velocity is everything. The faster the money moves, the less time it's in your pocket attracting, unwanted attention from rivals or the police.
So pretty quickly, you learn the golden rule of scaling in any of these markets.
You have to be the wholesaler.
You have to get to the source. You have to bypass all those vulnerable, low-margin, street-level middlemen because that's where the profit just explodes.
But here's the wall you hit, the financial barrier to entry. It's massive.
So West Coast marijuana growers, or later on the big ecstasy distributors like Sean Atwood, the accounts are clear.
You couldn't even get a meeting. You couldn't talk to the growers, the importers, the real source of the product without showing up with a serious bankroll.
And what's a serious bankroll?
We're talking an entry price of at least $40,000. Cash. Just to start the conversation about buying in bulk.
And that 40 grand, what's it really buying you? It's not just product.
No, it's buying you access. It buys trust. It buys you the bulk pricing that unlocks those huge geographic arbitrage opportunities we were just talking about.
If you don't have that liquid capital, you're stuck.
You're stuck forever at the retail or mid-level. You're making money slowly, you're dealing with constant street risk, and critically, your business is totally dependent on someone else's supply chain. You're just a customer.
So the whole initial phase is just a pure financial grind. Find the gap, run the logistics, and flip the profits as fast as you can until you break through that $40,000 wall and can finally approach the source.
Okay, so you've breached that barrier, you have the capital. The next big strategic decision is how you scale. And the method often depends entirely on the product you're selling.
That's right. We can really distill this down to 3 core models, and each one determine the organization's structure and its inherent risk profile. Let's start with Model A, the crack franchise model.
This is all about retail density, saturation, high volume turnover. This is a model that demanded the dealer stay in the trenches, focused on controlling territory.
It's pure retail genius, in a way. The crack spot system, a dedicated storefront, whether it's an abandoned apartment or a controlled stairwell, it's about creating a local monopoly.
We have accounts of these spots in the Bronx, run by crews like T-Tone's Yellow Top Crew or Unique's operations. They were running daily revenues of $10,000 to $20,000 a day.
That is staggering. From a single static location.
And the sophistication went way beyond just slinging vials. It was about customer retention, flow management, and brand loyalty.
Customer service, right. I remember reading the anecdote about keeping a bag of $1 bills on hand.
Tell that one is a perfect example.
If a customer came up and they were $1 short on a $10 vial, the dealer would spot them the dollar.
Why? Why do that?
Yeah, because that tiny gesture, it eliminates friction. It guarantees that customer is coming back to you tomorrow, not the guy on the next block. Assuming your product is good, of course.
It's classic brand building. You're providing an experience, not just a transaction. But this is where the tension comes in, right?
Yeah.
How do you square that careful customer service with the violence needed to secure the spot in the first place?
That's the core weakness of the franchise model. To establish that spot, especially during the crack wars of the 80s, it often required a definitive public act of violence.
A founding act, as you might call it.
We have that account of the teenage mogul who set up his spot on 107th Street.
Yeah, he had to sit on the stairwell, solo, with a shotgun, just to stake his claim and force out any resistance. The violence secures the real estate.
But the business acumen, the quality product and customer service, is what maintains the revenue after the turf is secured.
But the downside of that model, even for the top guys, is what you could call the golden handcuffs of operational proximity.
You're chained to the business.
Literally. The accounts describe 12-hour shifts, constant vigilance. This model keeps the leadership perpetually exposed, right there at the point of sale. It maximizes both the legal and the physical risk.
Okay, so that brings us to Beam Marijuana, a completely different scaling challenge.
Totally different. The product is bulky, it's heavy, it's less potent per ounce than crack or coke. Scaling it was a pure logistics case study.
The profit wasn't in controlling a block, it was in moving massive volumes across state lines to exploit higher prices in the Midwest and East Coast, where a local supply was almost non-existent.
So this demanded a pivot away from territory and violence and towards stealth and reliable transport. The whole game was efficiency and risk mitigation.
And the logistics ranged from the subtle to the mega scale.
Let's start subtle. The shyest Bob's equivalent strategy. This is about leveraging established commercial systems.
Meaning what? The post office.
Exactly. They found that mail and parcel services, UPS, FedEx, USPS, were, ironically, the most efficient way to ship.
And the strategy wasn't to send one giant box.
No, that's amateur hour. The strategy was to move small, reasonable amounts, say 5 to 10 pounds per box, but through different carriers all at the same time. You mitigate the risk of a single interception taking down your whole week's operation.
And the volume adds up quickly.
Frighteningly fast. 3 boxes a week at 5 to 10 pounds per box. That's 15 to 25 pounds weekly. At $1,000 profit per pound, which was a common figure, you're immediately running $1 million a year business.
And it's all just logistics. Low profile.
The analysis is just chillingly logical. A dealer could lose up to 80% of their shipments in transit and still turn a profit if they were moving enough bulk. The cost of loss was literally built into the business model.
But even these systems have their weak points, right? I remember the sources noting that UPS was the worst carrier.
Yeah, packages were often getting ripped off at the Kentucky sorting facility. That tells you that internal corruption, not just law enforcement, was a constant variable you had to manage in your supply chain risk model.
So that's the subtle side. What about the mega logistics?
Now we're talking about the Timmy McBride equivalent maritime operations, the big boats of the 70s and 80s.
This isn't parcels, this is freight.
Mega freight. The Reefer King accounts detail him flying down to Colombia to personally inspect loads of 40,000 pounds. That's 20 tons at a time.
So he's treating it like a legitimate multi-million-dollar commodity shipment.
He had to. He reportedly made millions from 1977 to 1980, doing only 3 of these trips a year.
Think about that, just 3 transactions a year. The low frequency massively reduces your exposure compared to the constant risk of a daily crack spot.
The operational secrecy was paramilitary level. Crews were hired from wherever. Boats were packed so high with bales they just left enough room for the radar to turn. Bales were marked for quality control, like a shipping manifest.
And how'd they get it to shore?
They'd use old crab boats for the final leg, coming in under the cover of night, met by specialized offload crews who would get it inland and into the distribution network immediately. It's all supply chain stability and high-level operational security.
Which brings us to our third model, sea cocaine and vertical integration.
This is the highest level of scaling. The Miami model, the guys like Rafa, and later international traffickers like Owen Hansen. This is about controlling the product from the raw ingredient all the way to the final wholesale delivery.
Controlling the entire value chain.
That's it. Before Escobar really consolidated everything, the Colombians didn't always grow the coca paste in Bolivia or Peru. They controlled the most crucial high-value step, the crystallization process.
For manufacturing.
Right. They'd import the raw paste, crystallize it into pure cocaine hydrochloride in their labs in Colombia, and then ship the finished product. That crystallization step was the control point that guaranteed potency and supply.
And by owning the entire operation from precursor chemicals to transport, stash houses, distribution, retailers, they achieved total market domination.
Rafa's biggest problem, though, wasn't getting the product in. It was the logistics of getting billions in cash back to Medellin to keep the whole cycle going.
And the economics of that vertical integration are just astounding.
A kilo manufactured for maybe $2,000 could be sold wholesale in the U.S. for $35,000.
And that's not even the ceiling.
Not even close. If you could get that same kilo across the Atlantic to Europe, say Madrid, it could fetch $60,000 or $70,000. That's peak global arbitrage combined with full vertical control.
And this is where we see some really sophisticated financial leveraging come into play. It wasn't always cash on delivery.
No, the ability to do business on credit was key to scaling fast. We have accounts of a 300-kilo deal where half the load was fronted on credit.
That's a massive line of credit. It maximizes the amount of product you can move without having all the cash up front.
But that credit structure is also where the business logic breaks down and the violence takes over, because the collection mechanism is non-negotiable.
When you owe an organization that kind of money, they don't send you a letter from a collection agency.
No, they send a very different kind of collector. And that swift, brutal enforcement is what maintains the integrity of their entire high-risk financial system.
So a central theme here, as you move past that multi-million-dollar mark, is the need for the organization itself to evolve.
It'd have to. You can't run a global enterprise like a street crew, where loyalty is all personal.
You have to move into a structured organization, something that looks more like a mini company or, in some cases, a military-industrial complex.
If you don't make that leap, you collapse. The groups that survived and flourished were the ones that formalized their chaos into specialized structures.
The Zetas are a terrifying but perfect example of this. They're known for their brutality, but their structure was shockingly corporate. It was built on their former military expertise.
And they separated their operations into specialized roles, which let them handle multiple criminal enterprises at once: drugs, extortion, kidnapping, human smuggling.
Let's detail those roles because they're so revealing. You had the Halcones, the Hawks.
Pure surveillance. Their only job was to be the eyes and ears, feeding intel to the operational groups.
Then the Sicarios, the hitmen. Pure enforcement.
Then you had your dedicated dealers at the puntos de venta, the sales points. And then, maybe most critically, you had the economic mobilizers.
The finance guys.
Exactly. The specialists handling the money, the laundering, integrating all that illicit cash into legitimate businesses.
And that structure, that specialization, it allowed them to become what one source called the narco version of ISIS.
They used military tactics, advanced surveillance, and superior intel, not just to run their own business, but to absorb and tax their competitors. They would just overwhelm them.
Now, contrast that rigid top-down military hierarchy with the Sinaloa cartel model, especially after Chapo's final capture.
It's a completely different philosophy. The structure shifted from that rigid vertical hierarchy, a CEO, managers, sellers on a payroll, to a much more flexible network.
A network of loosely affiliated families or clans. You have Los Chapitos on one side, Los Millitos on another.
And in that model, the cartel itself becomes less of a traditional company and more of a highly efficient intermediary, a coordinator.
They coordinate the massive flow of drugs, fentanyl, meth, coke, while these separate, specialized families actually execute the business on the ground.
But that network model requires constant alliances, especially in critical border cities like Nogales. It's a logistical nightmare, and you need that entrenched local help to make it work.
And from a law enforcement perspective, that network model is much more resilient, isn't it?
Oh, much more. It's built for deniability. If you take down one family, the network just reroutes the logistics through another affiliated clan. The overall structure remains intact.
And the operational details of this network show a high degree of technical skill. They treat smuggling like a science.
They have to. They employ specialized mechanics just to build trap cars, compartments that can withstand intense scrutiny at the border.
They use countermeasures, like oil-dipping kilos of marijuana to fool drug dogs.
That's chemical counterintelligence.
And they train their mules on specific protocols for crossing the border. It's applied psychology.
They're told to look the officers directly in the eye. They'll even put a Marine sticker on the car, knowing that border agents are often less likely to flag a vehicle associated with the military for an intense search.
That's supply chain optimization right down to the bumper sticker. But the ultimate scaling move, the final breakthrough, it's not just improving the supply chain for a risky product, it's finding a new product.
A new product with inherently lower physical risk, but explosive revenue, product diversification.
And the pill mill boom is the perfect case study.
This was a pivot from black market enforcement to regulatory fraud, exploiting legal loopholes instead of running a street corner.
Look at an operation like Chris George's in Florida. One operation, generating $4 million a month.
An astonishing number.
From pain clinics, pill
Wow.
mills, focused almost exclusively on high-demand prescription opioids.
The business model was just brilliant in its cynical exploitation of legitimate systems.
They'd finance the opening of these clinics, fronted by legitimate-looking entities. They'd advertise not on the street, but in mainstream magazines like Flex, the bodybuilding magazine.
Because they knew that was a target demographic highly motivated to use and share prescription pain meds.
And they employed actual doctors and dentists, people with the power of the prescription pad. They created a whole new quasi-legal supply line.
They basically replaced drug mules and speedboats with certified mail and white lab coats.
And they became masters at circumventing the controls that were put in place.
The fake police report scam is it's breathtaking. When pharmacies got suspicious, they had a protocol.
They'd tell their customers, the addicts, to go file a fake police report saying their pills were stolen.
And the doctors could then legally use that fabricated police report as justification to prescribe more medication to replace the lost dosage.
So they turned the legal system's own desire for accountability against itself. It's incredible.
They stopped dealing with the risk of bulk transport and replaced it with systemic, regulatory fraud. But they used the exact same business principles: arbitrage, market capture, and high-velocity capital.
Okay, so this brings us right back to the core debate. We've seen the sophisticated logistics of the revenue figures. What is the primary driver of this kind of scale and longevity? I'm going to argue it's business logic first. Violence is just a security cost.
And I have to argue that while business logic sets the prices and defines the margins, it's violence that establishes the market share for that logic to even operate. It's the non-governmental enforcement mechanism.
But the people who really rose, the ones who stayed on top for any length of time, they were the ones who understood business. Margins, supply chain, market demand, quality, for example, matters immensely.
That's absolutely true. The accounts show that users will pay more for a better product. The rule was, if a customer has $75 to get high, they definitely have $100 for the better product.
So having the Border Brothers Coke, that pure, high-quality stuff, was a scaling asset in itself. It commanded loyalty and higher prices, totally independent of brute force.
No argument there.
And beyond that, a lot of the successful hustlers explicitly avoided unnecessary violence. They saw it as bad for business.
Right. There are those accounts where if you show up to a high-level, multi-kilo deal with a gun, people just won't deal with you again.
Why?
Because it signals distrust, it signals recklessness, instability. At that level, you want to be seen as reliable and professional, not some hothead. Your reputation is your access to credit, to product.
Okay, so that professionalism is required at the wholesale level.
It is. But you have to distinguish that from the absolute necessity of violence in two key areas: securing territory and collecting debts. In many environments, violence is the only currency that establishes and protects market share.
It's the cost of real estate.
It's more than a cost. It's the founding principle. Think about the operational reality. To secure a corner in Harlem to sell crack, you had to physically force out the resistance. That initial act of violence is what creates the market space for your high-margin retail operation.
It sets the boundaries.
And when business logic fails, when credit breaks down, violence becomes the default economic solution. It's a form of extrajudicial bankruptcy court.
Exactly. I'm thinking of the mafia accounts. The breakdown of rules, killing for money or over unpaid debts, that was often a sign of organizational decay.
It was. But sometimes, when faced with a massive financial problem, pure ruthlessness was the most calculated, low-cost solution. We have that chilling account of an associate who was owed $250,000.
And it was just cheaper to get rid of him.
It was easier, cheaper, and faster for the organization to eliminate him than to pay the debt. Violence, in that instance, wasn't emotional. It was a purely economic tool. A monstrous one, but economic.
Which just confirms that the normal rules of business completely break down when there's no legitimate rule of law to enforce contracts.
Absolutely. And the biggest breakthroughs, those key moments that allow for massive scale, like getting a direct connect in Colombia, that was often facilitated not just by showing up with a huge bankroll.
You had to show power.
You had to demonstrate serious power, or at least the credible threat of it. The Colombians, for example, they preferred dealing with established groups like the Dominicans because of pre-existing trust. They wouldn't deal with an American black dealer unless that dealer could prove they had both the money and the demonstrable power to protect the products and the routes.
So the threat of force was like the final security clearance?
It's the security clearance of the criminal world.
Okay, so if we synthesize this debate, it sounds like business acumen builds the machine.
But violence and the threat of it provides the operating environment and enforces the contracts. You need both to reach the peak.
All those high margin figures, the speed of scaling, it all comes with this exponential increase in risk and a really profound psychological toll.
For the young guys who made it, that initial breakthrough, the first $100,000, it felt like hitting the lottery.
The accounts describe it as total liberation, making $5,000 a week when you're 22 years old. That kind of financial freedom, it lets you live the baller lifestyle. You're traveling, staying in the best hotels.
You have this profound sense that you'll never have to work a normal job again. It's a temporary escape from economic reality.
But that money is so often just a temporary high itself. It's a sharp contrast to the long-term reality of addiction, paranoia, and just reckless spending.
We have accounts of people blowing through $100,000 in 6 months just to sustain a daily Roxy and heroin habit. The wealth means nothing if the profits are immediately consumed by the destructive lifestyle the trade creates.
The money becomes just another addiction that fuels the cycle.
And as the scale of the operation increases, so does the heat, which leads to this perpetual and completely justified paranoia. Look at the cartel strongholds, like Culiacan in Sinaloa. The city is essentially run by the cartel.
What are the estimates on that?
Sobering. Between 50 and 100,000 people, up to an eighth of the city's population, are on the cartel payroll in some capacity.
And that level of embedding creates what you could call an unseen eye.
Exactly. The profound, constant sense of always being watched. Because anyone, the waiter, the cop, the taxi driver, could be reporting on you, either to the cartel or to the authorities. That constant vigilance is the true operational overhead of running at that scale.
And the paranoia is justified because the biggest vulnerability isn't the product, it's the money trail.
Always. The DEA and the FBI, they often don't find the drugs. They trace the cash. We have accounts of multiple cash shipments, anywhere from $3 to $5 million, being intercepted.
And even if they don't find a single gram of product on anyone,
it doesn't matter. Intercepting that cash leads directly to crippling conspiracy charges against everyone involved.
The old anecdote about keeping $100 grand in getaway money by the bed.
It only provides a fleeting feeling of security. Investigators can track serial numbers on bills, they can track bank wires, real estate purchases. That's much better evidence than seizing a bag of product from a mule.
The ultimate breakdown really comes when federal investigations scale up to what they call whole indictments.
This isn't one guy getting caught with a bag. This is 75 people getting swept up at once, and the case is built almost entirely on informant testimony and, critically, ledger records.
The ledgers are devastating.
They are, because of federal conspiracy laws. We have that one case where a dealer was sentenced based entirely on a ledger found in his associate's purse. It detailed 580 kilos.
Even though he was never personally caught with any of it.
Never. Conspiracy laws allow the government to turn what would be a simple possession charge into a multi-decade federal sentence. 32 years, 150 months, based solely on the documented volume in a notebook.
And that leads to the final grim reality of the golden handcuffs.
Yeah. The sheer volume of money, the complexity of the lifestyle, it makes walking away almost impossible, even when you know the risk is existential.
The life becomes your identity.
It's incredibly hard to shed. The system relies on you. We have that account of the Irish-American gangster sentenced to 150 months, 12 and a half years. He's inside. He's just been told his mother is dying.
And what's he focused on?
He's still focused on moving money for the organization from inside prison.
Why? Why does that mentality persist?
Because the organization demands it. And because the criminal lifestyle, with its own rules and status, becomes strangely comfortable. It's an easier way to survive inside the institution. The civilian world, with car insurance and mortgages and normal problems, it becomes confusing, undesirable. The criminal enterprise just absorbs your entire identity.
The finality is just so clear in all these stories for so many of these guys. Their big breakthrough moment, making millions, building an empire, it leads directly to their demise.
The system, the federal government, eventually catches up to the sheer volume of the operation.
So if we synthesize this entire deep dive, the patterns for scaling, whether they're illicit or legitimate, they're stark and they're consistent.
They really are.
First, you have relentless arbitrage and aggressive reinvestment, turning $50 microtransactions into the $40,000 bankroll you need to get to the source.
Second, you develop specialized structures. Everything from the retail crack franchise model to sophisticated maritime logistics to full vertical integration with cocaine.
And third, calculated product diversification. The pivot away from high physical risk products like crack into systemic exploitation, like synthetic pills and pain clinics.
The criminal world undeniably runs on a kind of business logic, but it's a logic that's accelerated and enforced by impunity and, of course, by violence.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, the true measure of success in this world, it's not revenue, it's survival.
Yeah.
Every single high revenue figure we've talked about came with an equal and opposite cost in paranoia, in legal risk, and ultimately in compromised freedom.
And we've established these organizations are not brittle. They're constantly adapting. They exploit geopolitical shifts, economic situations.
Like the rise of synthetics replacing traditional drugs, or charging $35,000 to smuggle a Chinese national into the U.S. through Ecuador. They adapt to the market.
Their ability to embed themselves into legitimate society and to diversify is proven. They have the logistics, the structure, the enforcement.
They have it all.
So we'll leave you, the learner, with this final provocative thought. Given the cartel's proven ability to diversify and adapt to every single political or legal shift, they mastered marijuana, cocaine, meth, synthetics. If full drug legalization were to happen tomorrow, completely eliminating their core product,
Wiping out their main revenue stream overnight.
what is the next inevitable, high-profit, illicit enterprise they would immediately pivot to, using the exact same structures and logistical networks they built to move drugs?
Think about those specialized units we discussed. The hawks for surveillance, the economic mobilizers for money, the sicarios for enforcement. Where do you aim that apparatus next?
The sourcing already gives us a pretty strong hint.
It does. It strongly suggests they are already deeply embedded in human smuggling, turning people into the next high-value commodity, and leveraging political corruption to ensure their own long-term survival, no matter what product they're moving.
Something profound to consider until our next deep dive. Stay vigilant and keep analyzing the spreadsheets behind the headlines.